Hello, this is Jason Gillearn. If you dig what you're hearing, please go to irishcomic.com and hit that donate button. Thank you. Promo code. All right, welcome back. This episode of the Promo Code Podcast with Jason Gillearn is brought to you by Number One Podcast. That's right. All right, this is a cool one because the owner of the company, Imran is his name, nice fucking guy, reached out to me directly, right? And he said he heard about my podcast and he told me that he could take this podcast that you're listening to right now to number one on the iTunes charts. But after I told him about my fear of success and failure, we both agreed that, you know what, maybe I can just promote his business on this podcast until I quit doing it, like I've quit a few others. Or until, like, a tsunami wipes out his homeland. So we'll see which happens first. Okay, so you love podcasts, right? Who doesn't, besides deaf people? Okay? So at some point, a lot of people say, you know what, I'm going to start my own podcast. I'm bored as fuck, right? And that's great, but the problem is no one's going to listen to your podcast if nobody knows who you are. I mean, let's face it, even your friends won't listen. They've already heard your take on stupid shit while drinking beers at your apartment, right? But you know what? Fuck them. You don't need them. All you need is number one podcast. These guys can take you to number one on the iTunes charts, which is going to drive people to your pod, right? You know, because if people see that you're number one, they're going to say, wow, I think I'll check that podcast out. Or they're going to say, this is obviously bullshit, but at least this guy cares enough to cheat. Now, I know it sounds a bit shady, but look, there's no reason why you shouldn't let them help you, because the entire system is rigged anyway. How are you going to compete with that? I'll tell you how. Number one podcast. And you can choose when you want to go number one. You want a slow build to the top? No problem. You want your podcast to debut at number one? No problem. Even if you don't have a podcast, your buddy, hook up your buddy. You have the ability to make your friend's podcast go to the top of the charts. And then place a stop payment and watch it plummet. That's a good prank. He won't know what the fuck happened. And nobody will know that you're working with this company because they are 100% confidential. I mean, someone can accuse you of trying to manipulate the charts, and there'll certainly be enough circumstantial evidence to suggest it's a possibility, but they can't prove it, pretty much for the most part. You know, I'm not going to say anything, unless the money's right. Work out some kind of deal, but by that time, you're on the top of the charts. You don't give a fuck. Okay, now how do they do this? Well, it's pretty easy. They just use click farms to artificially boost subscriber counts. That's it. Now, I know you're thinking, well, every scam service does this. But no, what sets number one podcast apart is they don't use bots like everyone else. They only employ young Asian boys, okay? These young cats just chill out and subscribe to your podcast all day long, day after day, until you're the king. And you don't need to feel guilty about this because it's not like you're making them build iPhones or make tennis shoes. They've already done that. That's why their little fingers are so nimble, right? Number one podcast only recruits from the best Apple and Nike sweatshops and the finest brothels in Southeast Asia. Look, if you work with them, you're pretty much saving a life here. Why should you work hard to market your podcast? Let the tiny little fingers of a prepubescent, hot little Asian boy do it for you. And you know, when I spoke to Imran, he said that if his ring happens to get busted by the Bangladeshi authorities, he'll just hire them instead. It's foolproof. Plus, if all else fails, he said he knows someone high up over at Apple. Apple One Temp Services. Now, I don't know how that's going to help. You know, maybe if your podcast flops, he can get you some seasonal work at the Gap or something. You really can't lose, man. All right, so go to their website. Type in the promo code COSMO. Okay, you're going to get $100 off, and 100,000 new Twitter followers. And if you act today, and they know this shit, they're sitting at the fucking computer, you get an additional 1 million Twitter followers, okay? Now, Twitter recently cracked down on the fake follower thing, so it won't work, but it's the thought that counts. Okay, please rate the podcast. Go to iTunes, leave a review for any of the products or services you've heard me talk about on this podcast. Check out jasongillearn.com, irishcomic.com. Drop me a line and stay cool. And thank you always for listening to the Promo Code Podcast with Jason Gillearn.